The money at stake could be enough for a lifetime. But for Tom Dwan, money is not an object, just a tool to wield. Welcome to the Full Tilt Poker Durrrr $1 Million Challenge. 3 men have dared to enter the lion's den without even a wooden chair. But here at the Lay Ambassador Casino in London, can anyone tame Tom Dwan? Welcome to the Les Ambassadors Casino for one of the greatest heads-up events. The stakes have never been so huge as 3 of the world's biggest high-stakes players take on poker sensation Tom Dwan. Known as Durrrr, this 23-year-old has a formidable reputation, winning one of the biggest televised pots of $1.1 million.
I convinced my parents to throw $50 online on my Paradise Poker account and never look back.
His opponents include Sammy and E07 George, Italian high-stakes player Marcello, and Finnish pro Ziigmund. They will play 500 hands and each bring $500,000 to the table in a bid to beat poker champion Dwan.
I would always rather end up with the money. I don't care if I get lucky or play well to get there, but it's most likely that you end up with the money if you play well.
The first match was against Sammy and E07 George. The London businessman lost $750,000. In the biggest hand, Durrrr bluffed, holding only 7 deuce.
Come on.
No.
Wow! That is a gigantic bet.
This is serious. Oh, you can't fold, Sammy.
This pot will go down in the history of TV poker. This was just incredible.
Fortunately, Sammy didn't make the hero call there, which would have been an absurd call. And lucky for me, he didn't make it. He really thought about it. I was pretty worried for a while there, but it worked out.
Last time it was Marcello taking on Durrrr. The biggest hand of the match was a bluff from Marcello. He went all in with King 9. And a very baffled Tom Dwan folded.
All in.
Wow, oh my God!
I guess I didn't pick the right time.
What a gutsy play by Marcello. And Marcello shows the bluff.
I won small, but I'm very happy because I beat the champion. And it was very difficult, especially because I won with my heart, with some big bluff.
Tonight, the final match begins as one of the biggest high-stakes players takes on Durrrr in a Pot Limit Omaha game, and he is not afraid to risk it all.
If I lose 500, I'm quitting.
That would be too sick.
I'm so tilted.
I just want to gamble.
I'll be joined for analysis throughout this match by the 2 most famous UK poker players, Triple Crown winner Roland Wolfe and Neil Channing. Guys, this match, Omaha, what are you expecting from it, Roland?
I think this is going to be a really fiery game because Omaha heads up. There's so many hands that come together in a way that Hold'em doesn't. And for viewers who haven't seen much of Omaha, you know, 4 cards, 2 in your hand, but the possibilities are endless and you hit a lot of flops, much more than in Hold'em, and there's all sorts of draws out there. And these 2 guys, I've watched a lot of them online. These 2 are 2 of the very best. They might be the 1 and 2 best heads-up Pot Limit Omaha players in the world. And I think I'm really excited to see what's going to happen today. I think this could be the standout game in the Durrrr Challenge.
These guys have played each other a hell of a lot before, and I think there's going to be a lot of added levels to this game because they're going to be remembering stuff that's happened in the past, and that's what interests me about it.
Let's have a little reminder for those who don't know how to play Omaha. Pot Limit Omaha, or PLO, is another version of Hold'em, but instead of 2 down cards, 4 are dealt to each player, and the first round of betting begins. As it is a pot limit game, a player's raise may be no larger than the size of the pot. After betting, a 3-card flop follows with another round of betting. Next comes the turn card with another betting round. And finally, the 5th river card and a final round of betting. At the showdown, a 5-card hand is made using exactly 2 cards from the player's hand and exactly 3 community cards. All 4 of the player's cards must be shown to qualify for a winning hand. Well, I'm thrilled to be joined for analysis throughout this match, probably by the man who is the most qualified to commentate on it, Blue Fire Poker's PhilGalfond. Welcome, Phil.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Now, you know these two, their poker games, as well as anybody in the world.
Yeah, I guess that's fair to say. I've played a lot with each of them. Not heads up with Tom. I'm pretty good friends with him, but I played a ton of games with him, and I played Ziigmund heads up plenty of times.
You are actually the only person in the world that Tom refuses to play, isn't that right?
Yeah, you could say that. Although I think that his motives are more friendly.
We've got a pot here. Both players starting with $250,000. There's already been a raise and a 3-bet, and we're going to see a lot of flops, aren't we?
Yeah, in general, Omaha is a type of game where you can see more flops than in Hold'em, just because you have more possibilities with your cards. And in addition to that, both these players are 2 of the most loose aggressive players I've ever played with. So yeah, we'll be seeing a lot of action, a lot of flops.
So Tom 3-bet from the big blind, check the flop, and what kind of trouble is he in now? Is this a good bet from him?
It is. He checks the flop here. In general, this is a board that doesn't do too well for a re-raiser who usually has high cards and hands like aces or kings. And where in Hold'em you might just bet and get your money in with an overpair, in Omaha it's a lot easier for Ziigmund to show up with a straight, 2-pair sets, things like that. So he played it kind of safe, and once Ziigmund checks behind, he figures to have the best hand most of the time on the turn, and just wants to protect his hand. And now once he's raised, it's the question of, did Ziigmund hit his either, trips or boat, or is he bluffing?
He has
and
played more
it's a really
hands
tough spot for Tom to be in
the last 2 weeks than I have played a whole year. That's it.
Who's up more?
Well, Tom loses that first pot.
It's sick too.
And these guys are very friendly to each other. I mean, they know each other pretty well personally as well, I think, and they play so many hands.
Yeah, I mean, in the very high stakes games, there are only so many people that are playing, and everybody gets to know each other fairly well.
How often do you think Durrrr is going to be raising from the
Put
button?
less than 8,000
Is it
hands
almost
the whole
every
year.
time?
Against somebody who is a weak player, he would raise 100%. Against Ziigmund, who I know he respects, maybe something like 90. Position is so powerful in Omaha.
Check on the flop. Ziigmund's got a flush draw, but I guess he's not super proud of it.
Yeah, neither of them have very much, and this is a flop that most people would continuation bet. Tom is a player that likes to check behind and see what action develops, I think, more often than most people. And it's because he handles turns and river situations very well.
9.
But yeah, at this point, he's just happy to show his hand down. And if he doesn't improve with the 9, he might decide to take a stab on the river.
So we're going to be seeing, because these players have played so many thousands of hands together, we're going to be seeing almost a continuation of a long match.
Yeah, absolutely. They have played so many hands together, and there's so much history there that it's going to be sometimes tough to know what they're thinking. They're going to be thinking a lot.
And they're 2 guys who, they gamble with each other. I mean, the swings they have and getting it in light and that sort of thing, they stick it in.
Absolutely. They've actually, Tom and Ziigmund have been known to occasionally have like an agreement where they are playing 501K and agree to raise to 3,000 and then re-raise to 9,000 without, no matter what their hands are.
Right, and they do that online, almost blind. Yeah. First time we've seen aces, and Ziigmund's just called the raise pre-flop.
Yeah, a little bit unusual for Ziigmund, but unlike No Limit, aces pre-flop in Omaha aren't quite as powerful, and the power position is so great that sometimes you want to keep the pot small out of position.
Are they like the most misplayed hand in Omaha even, or?
Absolutely, yeah. People who will re-raise only aces and aces every time, a good player can just pick them apart because they can call pre-flop and know their opponent has aces and hit their hand or pick spots to bluff them off their aces so often.
Well, this is kind of interesting. Durrrr hit the set on the turn. Now Ziigmund's hit the set on the river. I mean, was he planning on raising this river?
I'm sure that he was, yes, and now I would still expect him to, actually, and because
I call.
Oh, wow. That's a great call by Tom.
I mean, it's amazing, really.
I mean, effectively, if he doesn't think Ziigmund has 2-3, which it's tough for him to have here and play out of position, he has near nuts. And to just call there is a really impressive play. And quickly, too.
Yeah. So Ziigmund, I wonder if he's failed to get value there. That pot could have really got big.
It could have gotten really big.
He got me in
Probably would have gotten all in on the turn had he re-raised pre-flop.
where, like, it just annoyed me because I just knew I was going to lose. I don't know.
This is one of the keys, sort of, to Tom's personality. He just kind of lost a really weird pot. It's gone. He hasn't not even thinking about it.
Tom's played literally millions of hands, and so many of them huge pots that it doesn't get to you as much as you think.
I pot, get it in like five.
And Tom is better at that than anybody I know, really.
We've been watching, obviously, Tom play a couple of these matches, mostly in Hold'em. Some people say he's better at PLO than Hold'em. What's your view?
I mean, like, there were other pots he sucked
My
out,
personal
whatever,
view,
and other pots I sucked out,
the main thing about
but it
Tom
just
is that I
made
think
me
he's
really,
better
really
heads
angry.
up than a six-handed or nine-handed player. I think
Plus it
when it
would've made
comes to
him
no
tilt,
limit or
too,
PLO, I
like,
think it's pretty
for
close, and I
time.
think he's
Yeah.
world-class at both.
Ziigmund definitely a PLO specialist, though, and
Yeah.
there he's folded the button.
Yeah, and like I said earlier,
Looks like he doesn't run
neither of
twice.
them would fold the button at all against
Me?
a weak
No, he
player, but
doesn't.
they both
Oh,
respect
yeah,
each
he
other's
doesn't.
games a lot, and they both put pressure,
Yeah,
even
why
out of
don't you?
position, so they have to be a little more careful.
I just want to gamble. Yeah.
When
the
did
best
you
ever.
first encounter
You don't-
Ziigmund?
you
Was
don't
that
wanna play me
PLO
press
heads
here.
up, or?
Actually, I first started playing
I
him
do, but
at no limit. He would
just so
occasionally,
sick.
when there was no action at
Yeah.
PLO, venture over to no limit, and that was before I played PLO at all.
so many times in a row.
And he actually started out as a pretty weak no limit player, but since has gotten very strong at that too.
Ziigmund's hand looks pretty, and yet he didn't re-raise here. It looks like, is he playing? Is this just being careful, or is that not a re-raising hand?
The problem with low pocket pairs is that it's very tough to flop a very strong hand or strong draw if you don't flop your set after re-raising, or your nut flush draw. You're in a spot where you don't have many outs to improve. Let's say you've hit your ace, you don't have many two-pair outs. So no, he's made kind of the standard play to just call here and play a small pot out of position.
So when you talk about a good starting hand, low pocket pairs are kind of, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, for the most part. They're playable hands sometimes, but you have to be very careful. And as you saw a couple hands ago,
18,000.
it's a much easier in Omaha to get set over set it than in no limit.
Pot size bet with two pair, but he's beat by a lot of hands. In fact, he's beat by Durrrr.
Yeah, he's beat here, and the way they play, I'm surprised that Tom found a fold there. I guess he didn't think that Ziigmund would be value betting that thinly.
Known as Ziigmund, Ilari Sahamies and Durrrr have a history playing together online. They have a lot of respect for one another.
Ilari and I are both definitely in the top 10 PLO heads-up players in the world.
First time I met Tom, I met him online, and I played against Durrrr, 25-50 PLO. Then I met him in live, and he's a really nice guy and a very good friend of mine nowadays.
I play with Ilari a ton online. He's a very good poker player and a very big gambler. And we're both very friendly, but we also probably have gambled more money than just about anyone else has versus each other.
I took this challenge because it's fun to play live. It's a challenge for me, for myself also. I love to play poker, and I love to play live poker, and like this, it's very cool, and I love it.
He won 22,500.
These guys are big gamblers, and I mean, we've been watching 500, 1,000, no limit Hold'em, but this game's bigger, PLO, right? How much bigger?
PLO does play bigger. It's hard to
He
get
made
an
two
exact,
sick
you
we
know,
played Omaha. 50
multiplier,
hands.
but I would say
Okay.
maybe twice as
400
big.
hands
You
no
just see
limit,
way
hands
more
over.
flops, way more re-raised pots.
He shoved.
And this idea about to be good at this game, you
four
have
bet.
to be able
Well, I
to
raised,
gamble.
He
Is
made it
that
9,000.
true?
I made it 27,000.
You have to have a tolerance
Called
for,
King 5
for a
deuce.
gamble,
He checked. I bet
but you don't have to be quite
36
as
or
crazy as these
38,000.
two.
Call.
He shoved 9-8-6-4 with two backdoor flush draws on King 5 deuce rainbow.
raise from the
Like
button and
200,
call by
10,000.
Ziigmund.
I think that the
So I had queen
the
9,
swings of
5, 4 or
PLO
something.
is something that most players and
Okay.
people like
And
myself
then he made the
tolerate,
queen, yeah, the
but
king 9
it's something that
hand
Okay.
Tom and Ilari kind of enjoy.
Now this,
too. I mean, it was,
is a
they were both
monster
decent by him
flop, right?
because I thought
Yeah,
he was
huge for
precise,
Tom.
so.
In PLO, it's very huge to have a nut draw. So here with the nut flush draw, in addition to 2 pair, it's almost impossible for him to be in bad shape.
3 of a kind even.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. I missed the bottom set there as well.
And Ziigmund's just the jack high flush draw. Is that it's second nut, so he's gonna feel good about it.
Yeah, he does feel good. Second nut draw. Now he picked up a gutter, so he'll likely be calling again with his pair as well. But he's in, as you can see, terrible, terrible shape.
And when Tom bets the turn here, I mean, how strong is it? Could he be bluffing here? You know, could Ziigmund be thinking about raising here, or?
Ziigmund certainly could raise if he sense weakness from Tom, but yeah, this is a spot where Tom bets so often on the flop and turn, and there are so many draw combinations in PLO that there are a ton of hands he could have.
And time for a value bet. Is Tom ever thinking that he's losing right now?
No, he's very confident, and especially with their history of Tom bluffing so much and Ziigmund making loose calls is a very easy value bet. And I mean, I can't see Ziigmund finding a call with just a pair of 4s. Even against a bluff, that's sometimes not good.
These guys play so much online. Is the live aspect of it going to be different at all? Sort of like looking at each other, or?
That's a good question. I think that with the 2 of them, not so much. I think that their kind of live experience is similar to each other. With some players that have a much more live experience than an online player, I could see it playing a big role.
Tom takes the pot, a little smile, and that's his first big pot.
Nothing else?
Deuce 999.
Oh, he showed the deuce, didn't he? Well, look at the stats. They haven't played that many hands so far. Anything jump out at you?
Ziigmund's button raise of 58% is definitely not what his button raise will be at the end of this session. I think that's just due to the hands he's been getting, but their 3-bets are both pretty low, and I would expect their 3-bets to pick up.
Durrrr looks exhausted, but Ziigmund is fresh to this table and out to get all of Tom Dwan's cash.
If I lose 500, I'm quitting. I'm too tired.
Sammy have to do it.
Most frustrating thing ever.
Join us after the break when the Full Tilt Poker Durrrr $1 Million Challenge continues. Welcome back to the Full
Don't
Tilt
even start
Poker
that.
Durrrr $1 Million Challenge. Watching Durrrr and Ziigmund here with PhilGalfond. What do you make of it so far, Phil?
So far, the match has been slow. I think they've both been a lot more patient than I'm used to seeing them, and kind of content to play small pots, and we'll see if that picks up. I don't know.
Ziigmund raising from the button, and Durrrr's just called.
Yeah, ace-queen, good hand and hold'em, but with nothing really to go along with it except for the suit to go with it. Not a very strong hand.
5,000.
Are good hands, sorry, heads up, a lot different than goods hands in a ring game? I mean, how pre-flop?
Yeah, in a ring game, it's hugely important in PLO to have a nut draw. Playing a king-high flush draw compared to an ace-high flush draw is a massive difference. In heads-up, it's not as big a difference because it's not as frequent that you'll be flush over flush, things like that. And just in general, hand values just go way up, and you can play tons of hands heads up.
It is hard to know, though, heads up, when you have to start having the nuts and when you can be really marginal. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's why heads up gets very interesting. In a 6-handed or 9-handed game, you flop the 3rd nut flush, and there's a lot of action. You can pretty happily fold. In a heads up game, it's not at all the case, especially in a match like this.
Second time we've seen Ziigmund just calling from the big blind with the aces.
Check.
Yeah, I guess he's has it in his head that he wants to play smaller pots and keep this match under control, at least for the start. And another flop that most people would continuation bet that Tom checks behind. And in order to make that profitable, I think he needs to be making a lot of plays on turns and rivers. Bluff raises on the turn in spots like this potentially. Not that he has to right now, and he doesn't. But otherwise, he's going to be giving up a lot of small pots.
He has a reputation, though, Tom, for checking more often on the button than other players.
Yeah, he definitely checks behind more than any other successful high-stakes player, and he makes it work.
Why didn't you play high stakes this year?
Why?
High stakes
Because
poker.
I called too late to Mori, and he said you might get a seat. And okay, I won't come to Vegas, and I might get a seat.
This guy's talking about the high-stakes poker that Tom recently played on in Las Vegas. And
He thinks you're a nit.
Ziigmund's had kind of a
Mori?
sort of a bad experience on
Just 'cause of,
TV.
like, the- I
They
mean,
thought he was
he
very
knows you're not,
boring, or so that's what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
Yeah, it's funny,
I
I-
understand, yeah.
I mean, I've only met him a few times in real
I
life,
told him that
but
was the tightest you've
his
ever played
reputation
so
online
far.
and in
Yeah,
real
because
life
you were dead
is
tired and
very
hungover.
far from
Oh,
boring.
yeah.
And I'm not
I don't know. I
sure.
think
I'm not
you
sure
believe
what
me.
about
I didn't
his few
sleep like
experiences on TV has made him that way.
I didn't sleep like 5 days before when I played. It was
5 days?
Yeah, almost.
What?
Like,
How do
okay,
you do
like
that?
okay, like 2 hours per night.
Oh, okay.
I was so tired. It was so sick.
I mean, Dwan's calling this. What's his plan here?
I was
Well,
gonna say, isn't that
he
like
doesn't know that Ziigmund has a hand that's
possible
strong.
without drugs?
Ziigmund has a much stronger
Yeah.
hand than he usually will in this case. Tom also has position. He's planning on either, spiking his flush or his 9, or taking the pot away on a later street. And here Ziigmund's hit the nuts. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Tom make a move at this board. But again, they're both playing pretty patient to start.
Just sort of picking up on this TV idea, I mean, and the fact that they seem to be playing a little bit differently than usual. You think maybe Ziigmund's got it in his head that there's kind of more at stake here than just the money, that he wants to beat Tom on TV?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, anytime you have high-stakes players going at it, especially friends, there is a bit of ego involved and pride in winning, and I would think on TV that, that's just enhanced.
Raised 3,000.
And you also don't want to do something stupid on TV and embarrass yourself. And I think who knows, it could be the way they want to start the match, or
I
it could
forgot
be a
what my
plan
cards
that
are, one
Ziigmund
hands.
or Tom have kind of laid out in their
So
head
far.
for the whole match.
Right, they're going to be here for 500 hands, and this is only for the feeling out period, I guess.
Yeah. And all the pots, when I say, Tom could potentially take a stab here, or Ziigmund could make a move here, doesn't mean that they should be, or that they often will. But you have to be able to make moves in spots like that in order to stay balanced and unpredictable.
Second nuts for Tom. Call, raise.
Well, Tom just calls, and again, Tom is on earlier streets maybe a bit more passive than most people. And because he calls so often with weak hands and checks behind with weak hands, he has to kind of balance by playing a strong hand this way as well.
So he's not scared about the 4-6, or he's not, it's a possibility, but not something he's worried about.
It's a tiny factor. One of the downsides of raising is that you build a big pot against 4-6, but his main consideration is deception here. And a good check fold by Ziigmund. I would expect him usually to fire again there to kind of protect and semi-bluff with his 2 pair outs. But I guess he sensed something from Tom.
Both players playing at a pretty high level so far, then.
Yeah, I'm impressed so far. And they've both been, especially given their reputations as very loose aggressive players, they've been making some good folds.
It's funny, whenever people play him too, I want them to just break even. Because I don't want him to win more money, because I don't, I'm angry that he's run so good already.
I believe
But I also don't want anyone to win money from him.
Tom's talking about the famed Isildur, who
Yeah,
he's
I'm sure
been
he is.
sort of moonlighting on Nights Online playing against.
We raised to 9,000. Cool.
So we haven't seen too many
you
of
going
these
back to
3
Finland
bets,
up
but
here?
here's one from Durrrr. Standard?
Are you going back to Finland?
Yeah, this is a very standard, super strong kings here, double suited and pretty well
I might
connected.
try to go sometime in the next few months.
And Ziigmund has a big hand as well.
Check.
He's flopped the flush. Would it be more deceptive for Ziigmund to check here, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I wouldn't be shocked if he did, and there he does. It's a spot where most of the time Tom is going to miss. He often has a hand like ace or kings, and not as often are they going to be suited to clubs. So it is a good spot for Ziigmund to take stabs at the pot. So by him checking behind here, Tom should think that it's very unlikely Ziigmund has a flush.
13,000.
And sort of Ziigmund's idea, if the pot gets too big, he doesn't like the 8-high flush, but I mean...
Right. You have to be careful also if Tom's re-raised with, let's say, ace-ace, 6-5, and just a lone ace of clubs, which will happen quite often. Ziigmund could be check-raised here on the flop and end up potentially folding the best hand on the turn or river.
Is there any way that Tom can get Ziigmund off this hand?
At this point, with Ziigmund checking behind the flop, I think it'd be very unlikely. He could even think that Tom's making a super thin value bet with trip aces. So I don't think he could fold a flush, no.
And if Tom bets here, it's purely a bluff.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's hard for a lot of people to see pocket kings in a hand and think that somebody's bluffing, but in PLO, his hand is pretty much nothing. And Tom decides not to bluff.
Ziigmund's going to have a long think about this.
Yeah, so Ziigmund can be confident here if he bets and gets called that he has the best hand. What he's worried about is a check raise. Because this is a play that Tom would make with
1,000.
a nut flush or with just a lone ace of clubs. So that's why he's considering not betting.
And he ended up only betting 12 into 44, which is a pretty small bet.
Yeah, I guess hoping to get just a crying call from Tom. But Tom really had nothing.
So far, these guys have all managed to get away from the hands when they've been losing.
Yeah, and that is
Yeah, we'll
not
do
to
a,
say that
ski
they
trip somewhere in
make
the
bad
US.
calls, but
But if we don't,
they
then I
both
might
are
go
on the
as
side
soon
of
as skiing there, right?
finding calls where it's hard to find
Like
them.
skiing and snowboarding and stuff? Is there good
Because
mountains in Finland?
for the people who've watched
Or-
these two play
Okay,
online,
and
you just
there's
kind of
very
naturally
good
assume
after party.
that they just call everything.
Very good.
Yeah, it
And,
seems
yeah,
that way sometimes.
If you want to
but
skiing,
there's
yeah.
always a lot of thought going into it, and,
If we don't
and
end
we
up
can
doing
see
a
that
US
here.
trip, we'll probably go there.
Yeah,
Cool.
there's very nice places.
They're with the
Very
aces.
Not the best not like in Switzerland.
And Ziigmund's hand, I mean,
I mean, I'm not
that
very
5,
good,
6,
so-
6, 7,
Yeah, yeah.
is it a
I just
lot
wanted to
weaker
choose to
than
go
something
there,
like
so-
5, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say.
Sure.
It is a lot weaker than 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, with the pocket pair, you can flop a set, but with a hand like 5, 6, 7, 8, you can flop extremely strong draws that are even favorites over top set on the flop.
I've had double suited aces with diamonds. I've had like aces with an ace high suit and like 9-8 or queens or double suited or whatever 4 times I think, and like
Okay.
every time versus Cecil, that's like every time I get aces, I get really really happy versus Cecil.
I saw one hand against Isildur. You had 9, 10 jack ace. You won it. You had
Versus
aces. Yeah.
so sick.
But
I mean, I was double suited.
you got a monster flop.
Yeah. It was like 8-7-5 or something.
Raised 3,000 total.
That was one of those flops that I was like, if I lose, I'm gonna just burn down the whole time.
8-7 deuce with the flush draw.
Okay, yeah.
So bad draw. Yeah.
Both players double suited, as they say, and Tom's let out at this.
Yeah, Tom's in a spot where if he checks, he does have top pair,
Out of
top
back
kicker,
door
but
flush draw
no
there.
real
Yeah.
other
So huge.
potential. So he chooses just to lead out and hope to take down the pot there.
I figured he turned me dead. Just to turn with some brick.
Yeah.
Right? I think it was a brick.
And you know, sometimes when a check call doesn't seem that good and a check fold
really weird
doesn't leave you feeling that good, it might be a good spot to lead out.
Win all my money.
And is that a lot of times in heads up, sort of the lesser of three evils? Is that what you have to do?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you do have to be careful and not only lead out with marginal weak hands like that, otherwise an opponent as strong as Ziigmund will take advantage of it. But Tom does a good job of leading out very strong hands, marginal hands, and very weak hands.
Another 3-bet from Durrrr. This hand looks strong.
It is. It's not as strong as, say, his double-suited kings, but with a lot of mid to high card and suited potential, it's very strong.
I guess it's all about sort of those equity numbers.
Yeah, even more than equity. Equities in PLO run so close pre-flop, it's kind of about playability, and you have to think about what kind of hands can develop. So here you see he's flopped top pair and an open-ender. This is a hand that flops very well, and often will flop a draw with overcards with a pair.
Whereas Ziigmund, even though he's got the better hand, is kind of, he's struggling a bit, isn't he?
Yeah, well, he has his check behind, while it seems deceptive with bottom two pair, it's actually sort of a standard play against a tough player like Tom, who's capable of check raising the flop. So he's kind of gone for some pot control, check behind the flop, called the turn, and then on the river, he's going to have to make a decision depending on the card.
It was like half the cards in the deck that improved Durrr's hand, but that's not one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And so Tom thinks that he could have the best hand here, but certainly not enough to value bet. So he has to check and make a decision. And this is a tough decision. Not only is the flush draw on board that Ziigmund could have checked behind, there's a lot of straight draw potential around the king-queen and around the 5-7 that all missed.
It seems like you have to be a pretty... I mean, this isn't a standard value bet by Ziigmund, right?
Right. No, this is a thin value bet, especially so large. And he's done a good job of putting Tom correctly on a top pair or over pair type hand and trying to get a lot of value out of his weak two pair.
Is this a bet that Ziigmund say that only a very small percentage of people would make?
I would say that, yeah. I think a lot of people, especially against someone like Tom, get a little bit scared to face a river check raise and don't think they're going to be called by worse often enough. But Ziigmund and Tom, both of these players, are two of the most fearless PLO players I've played against.
Are you thinking about calling here if you're Durrrr?
I am. And, you know, that's what Ziigmund knows. He knows that he can thin value bet here because so many draws missed. But then Tom knows that Ziigmund knows that, and you can go that route all night.
Ziigmund manages to take the pot. Ziigmund was a childhood friend of another great high-stakes player, Patrick Antonius. They started playing poker together 7 years ago. Ziigmund's now considered one of the most aggressive PLO players.
I born in Tikkurila. It's very near of it's a city very near of Helsinki, and I was there in school, and then I went to high school, but I started to play poker like when I was 18. So last 2 years was so-so, but I have played now 7 years poker, and that was cool city anyway. When I was 14, I started to play pool, billiard, and I met Patrick in pool hall. First time when we played poker with Patrick, it was Patrick's house, and it was like 20 cents dollars blind, and I lost almost every time like $20, but it was a lot for me. Actually, first big win was in casino in Helsinki, and I think I won like $5,000. So it was like 30,000 Finnish marks, and I remember that one very well. It was very nice, of course.
Stakes are high in this cash game brawl. Can Ziigmund defeat the poker sensation Durrrr? There is still plenty more action to come here at the Les Ambassadors after the break.
Slow rolling.
You only do that to me, I don't do it to you.
Don't speak about that.
Welcome back. Watching PLO with a man who's actually won a World Series of Poker bracelet in the game, PhilGalfond. Different though, heads up and tournament play.
Yeah, absolutely. Deep stack heads up as well. This is, I mean, not that I want to discredit myself, but this is a much more complex game than the game at the final table that I won.
And so when we're talking about these guys playing, stack size, does that factor into every hand?
It's always a consideration. A strong player knows and is thinking about stack size the entire time and is thinking about, if I bet and get raised, how many bets are left? What will the stack to pot ratio be at that point? So yeah, it's on their minds a lot.
And could that be an explanation for why they're not doing as much 3-betting as maybe you'd expect?
Yeah, I think so. They are pretty deep here, and like I said before, position's super powerful in PLO, and you do have to be careful getting in big pots out of position, especially with a lot of money left in play.
Ziigmund led at this on the flop. Now the turns come and he's barreled again.
Yeah, his flop bet is, you know, kind of a marginal hand, but more on the side of value bet with his top pair and decent draw. And Tom has made a somewhat standard call on the flop, and now the question is, he has the nuts, and he's thinking about the stack to pot ratio. He's probably going to raise here, but he has to think about what can happen if he does, because this is a board that his top set is very unlikely to be the nuts by the river.
Right, and the fact is he's got an 80% equity. We can see those percentages, but he's thinking if he gets called, he's more like, he could be 50-50 even, or?
Yeah, well, the other thing is he could be 60-40 or 65-35, but if Ziigmund has a hand like Ace-3-4 with a couple diamonds and calls the turn on a river queen, Ziigmund can bluff. On a river diamond, he could bet, and Tom doesn't know if he's good or not. There are a lot of rivers that could come that Ziigmund could lead out and put Tom in a tough spot.
Well, he did make the pot size raise, and Ziigmund quickly folded.
Yeah, even though Ziigmund's hand looks fairly strong, obviously not against Tom's hand, but against hands in general, against hands that are raising pot there. His flush draw is often not good. His 2 pair outs aren't good. His set out isn't always good, so an easy fold at that point.
Easy fold for Ziigmund, anyway.
Yeah, a lot of beginning players in PLO get very carried away with, well, I have a pair and a flush draw, and in No Limit, that's a monster. But in PLO, as you can see, you run into bigger hands so often.
$6,000 pot, raise and call.
Check.
And
A little bit of a loose call by Ziigmund in the big blind, and another one of Tom's check behind.
so what percentage of hands would you be throwing away in the big blind then? 50% or?
You know, I don't know an exact percentage. I know that personally, I like to be tighter out of position than I know that Ziigmund is. If I had to guess, I'd maybe be throwing away 60% of hands in the big blind.
Wow.
But you also then don't want to let people just raise with reckless abandon, so you do have to 3-bet your stronger hands.
And even though Durrr's still got nothing, really.
Yeah, and this is one of those spots where I said if Tom's going to keep checking behind, he has to make some moves on the turn and river, and here he does. Because as you can see earlier, he checked behind a couple times, Ziigmund would bet out, and Tom would just fold. And now he's made sure to keep his play balanced and bluff raise some turns.
So they're pretty even so far, but there's always been the potential for big pots.
Yeah, you know, we avoided a couple spots where, you know, Tom made a big fold, a big just call with his set of 9s. There's a spot where Ziigmund had a second nut flush draw against Tom's nut flush draw, and they didn't both improve. There's been potential for a lot of big pots.
Because, I mean, can you sit down in a game like this and say, I'm going to sort of try and avoid big pots? Because they just happen, don't they?
Yeah, no, you can't. You really can't avoid them. You can slow them down a little, the way that they're doing, and not 3-betting so much out of position. But they are going to happen in PLO.
What sort of bet has Ziigmund made on the flop here?
It's pretty much, I mean, it is a semi-bluff in that he has some outs, but it's almost on the side of pure continuation bet, pure bluff.
Just you've got to do that every so often just to keep your balance up.
Yeah, and in position, there's not a whole lot Tom can do, especially with stacks this deep, to punish Ziigmund for betting too much in position. And so here he has improved pretty much his only good card to see. And Tom's hand looks like a good hand both on the flop, a little bit less so on the turn, but he has to be very careful as he doesn't do well against top 2 pair, he doesn't do well against sets, he doesn't do well against especially a hand like top pair with a flush draw. So that's why you don't see him check raise a flop with top pair and an open ender.
I mean, is it a mirage, Tom? Is he ever folding right now?
Almost definitely not. He does, you know, have the ability to improve to a straight, although not the nut straight. And he does have 2 pair, which he could be best right now, since Ziigmund, even though over this match hasn't been too aggressive, is known to be very aggressive, and they have that history. And if he's not best, he has some else to improve.
And, I mean, the real problem, no matter what came, he could have faced a really big river bet, 54K or so.
Yeah, and that's one of those spots where Tom trusts his decision and makes looser plays on early streets and puts himself in some tough spots. But he trusts his decision-making on the river there, and had the river been a brick, Ziigmund would have bet again, and Tom would have had a tough decision.
Check behind, 54K for him. Looking at the stats, Ziigmund still has never 3-bet.
Yeah, and I'm still surprised to see that, and his button raise at only 65%. Either he went into this match with a plan, or I don't really know what, to be honest.
You saw Durrr's won 62% of the pot so far. Would you'd expect that pretty significant heads up over a long term?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually a little bit surprised that Tom has won most of the pots with his strategy of checking behind flops so often. But I guess he has found ways to pick up pots, leading out on the flop, bluff raising turns, things like that. And, you know, over time, it does help. I mean, the big pots matter, and they'll add up, but all these little pots that Tom's winning will make it tough for Ziigmund to come out ahead.
5,000.
It's hard to tell yourself the little pots matter when you're getting 500 bets in on the...
Absolutely, and yeah, after big pots is one of the times that I think opponents of mine play the worst. You know, whether they won or lost, they kind of ignore the small pots, and I think that's a good time to kind of pounce on them.
Now, Ziigmund check called on the flop. I mean, with 2 jacks, is it a... Was he thinking that his hand is good ever?
Well, he's thinking it could be good, and he's thinking his call looks very strong here because there's not too much that can call. So he doesn't expect to be bluffed off the hand in the future, and it could develop in a way that he could turn his hand into a bluff.
It was checked from then on. Durrrr with ace-king, but didn't like it.
Yeah, and that's one of those spots, again, where Tom checking behind so often, Ziigmund has to be careful making calls like that against Tom, where against other opponents who are c-betting all of their air, it might be more of a call.
See Roland to Wolfe there.
Against,
big smile, enjoying the action. For
we
most
were up like
poker fans, this is a real treat getting to watch these guys play.
Absolutely. This is
Okay. I don't think 200
one of
and
the
150 at most.
best matches and best formats that I could think of.
And are you a guy who would watch these guys play even with sometimes the very incomplete information of only getting to see turned over hands? I mean...
Yeah, after a while it gets a little bit boring not seeing their hands like this, but with the added incentive of learning a bit about my opponents, I do watch them play pretty often.
5,000.
How strong is Ziigmund right now? What does he think about his hand?
Well, obviously at this point he has no hand. If they were to get to showdown unimproved, he has nothing, but he has a fairly decent draw. The problem is he can never
16,000.
he can never hit a nut hand, just given that there's already a full house potential on board.
Check called the flop, led out the turn, making it to look like a 7, I guess.
Yeah, an unorthodox line for a 7, but potentially a hand like 7-9, and you see there he made Tom fold an overpair. So a good change of pace and good play by Ziigmund.
Durrrr, not even suspecting he was bluffed.
Yeah, we've seen Tom make a few very, very quick decisions here in spots that I would think, require more thought. I don't know if that's a factor of Tom's brain working much more quickly than mine, or
Maybe if I'm
he's
losing
just
like 100,
in the mood to play quick and get
Sammy
hands in.
have to do it.
Raise up to 3,000. Call.
Probably a combination of both.
Raise and call. Ziigmund's hand looks pretty. Is it very pretty?
Yeah, Ziigmund has a huge hand here, pre-flop. It's almost never in bad shape. It can't be in bad shape pre-flop,
5,000.
and has so much playability post-flop. And so here we've talked about Tom leading out. He leads out now with a very strong hand, bottom set.
Call.
Right, and if you're Ziigmund, you're thinking, oh, he'd be doing this with a flush draw or something like
Yeah,
that.
flush draw, or a hand much like Ziigmund has. You know, Tom mixes it up very well, and Ziigmund knows that.
It's now not the nuts, the 3-5s.
Yeah, definitely not. And Ziigmund has some equity here, but he has to fold his hand. First of all, because he might be drawing dead at this point to a straight, or if he's not, a lot of his outs are tainted because they could be hearts or spades.
Would Durrrr have had to call if he got raised there?
It would be a very tough spot, and I think that it's another one of those spots where Tom can call and potentially decide to bluff some spade or heart rivers, as well as value betting if he hits a full house.
Durrrr on the coffee.
3,000.
3,000.
And, yeah, he's in the dark. But he's raised 100% of his buttons so far.
Yeah, so not as exciting as their automatic 3,000, 9,000 that I've seen before. I've actually never seen Tom drink coffee before, so he must be very tired.
He has been burning the candle at both ends. And, I mean, I've read your blog on Blue Fire Poker quite often. You don't seem to be the kind of guy who enjoys putting in the 14-hour sessions.
No, I think that I'm, I don't know if you want to call it more careful or just less confident than Tom, but I want to make sure I'm always playing my best, and so I just think it's very difficult to in times like this, and maybe Tom's just better at it than most people.
This hand looks very tricky from Durrrr. Bottom, well, almost bottom two pair,
Right.
a wonky flush draw.
Yeah, so kind of a decent hand, or a marginal hand, but in a couple ways.
Got a call, though, on the turn.
Yeah, absolutely, and he doesn't really know what he wants to hit.
Ziigmund got there, but does he know it? I mean, is this a value bet if he makes it?
This is a thin value bet. He has a pretty good handle, I guess, on what Tom's hand or range is, but he does put himself in a position to get bluff raised here. A lot of players would opt to check and make a decision in Ziigmund's shoes. So kind of an aggressive thin value bet. And Tom now has no hand at all. Since you can only use, 2 of your cards and 3 of the cards on board, he has 7s and 5s and can't even beat some bluffs. So I'd be shocked if he found a call here. I think he's considering bluff raising.
Would it work?
It very well could. And these guys, like we've said before, have so much history that they're thinking of so many past times when one of them's raised the river. Ziigmund's thinking, can Tom play this hand in a way that he has a draw and now missed in his bluff raising? One potential or one benefit to Tom's hand is that it's tough for Ziigmund to have 7-7, 2-2, or 7-5, or 2-5 because Tom has a couple blockers in his hand. So the 7 of clubs and 2 of clubs are 2 cards that Ziigmund can't have. So I think that makes him more apt to bluff.
And this is awesome. I mean, Durrr's raised his 37,000, and now Ziigmund, he's thinking of calling, and if he does, it's only because he's thinking Durrr may have bluff raised my thin value bet.
Yeah, and this is a spot that most people try to avoid in Ziigmund's shoes by checking the river and not giving Tom the potential to make a bluff raise or a value raise. But Ziigmund, like Tom, is confident in his ability to make decisions, and he he's put himself in a very tough spot here.
Because, I mean, he's got nothing, Ziigmund, basically, right? King's up,
Yeah.
queen. It's.
He certainly only beats a bluff and a very, very good call.
Are you surprised he called there?
Not surprised. I guess I expected him to fold, but it certainly wasn't out of the question for him to find a call here. And given their history, things like this happen all the time with them.
That must feel good. I mean, he got 50,000 on the river.
Yeah, and with a great play, he might pick up his confidence and pace on the match.
Ziigmund now ahead 100,000. You can look at these stats, but all of it due to river play, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, these are two players that get to rivers often and find themselves in tough spots, and we've seen a few good ones.
Durrrr still ahead in the win percentage, but nothing else. Durrrr and Ziigmund are playing for huge stakes. And even when they take a break from the game, they carry on gambling at Chinese poker. And Tom Dwan is on a losing streak. Join us after the break when the money continues to fly about this poker table. Welcome to the Les Ambassadors Casino, where 3 of the world's biggest cash game players agreed to take on poker sensation Tom Dwan. Tonight, the final head-to-head battle continues, and Pot Limit Omaha is in play as Finnish pro Ziigmund strives to win bundles of cash. Pot Limit Omaha, or PLO, is another version of Hold'em, but instead of 2 down cards, 4 are dealt to each player, and the first round of betting begins. As it is a pot limit game, a player's raise may be no larger than the size of the pot. After betting, a 3-card flop follows with another round of betting. Next comes the turn card with another betting round. And finally, the 5th river card and a final round of betting. At the showdown, a 5-card hand is made using exactly 2 cards for the player's hand and exactly 3 community cards. All 4 of the player's cards must be shown to qualify for a winning hand. Now, the starting hands these guys are playing are different heads up than they would be normally.
Yes, I think in an Omaha ring game you would be much more selective, but especially from the button, you're looking for a lot wider range of hands. You know, anything that maybe 3 playable cards together. You know, something in a connected, something suited to an ace or even to a king. Things that you wouldn't play in a full game, or double suited, obviously, double paired. You know, but you can be very, very wide. You know, there's 4 things that kind of go together. It's kind of a style thing, but you definitely have a lot of scope. There aren't much folding, especially from the button. From the big blind, you've got to be a little bit more reserved with what you play.
Yeah, people often say to me, like, what's a good starting hand in Omaha? How do I make the move into Omaha? And I say, if you're playing in a full ring game, my main advice would be always 4 cards working together. But this is completely different heads up. But what you get in Omaha in a situation, quite often you start looking at your cards and you're getting you get an ace and now you get a king and oh, this is all good, I'm going to get a good hand. And now there's a 3 there. Well, if I'm playing in a full ring game, I might throw this hand away now. It's got this dangler, this dodgy 3 hanging around there. I've got an ace, a king and a 10. This looks like quite a good hand. Now there's a 3 there. Heads up, we don't worry about the 3. This is a good hand. I can go to war with this hand.
But what we've noticed so far is that when one of these guys starts putting money in pre-flop, he always sees the flop. He's not folding to the re-raise. Is that because of the pot odds?
It's because that hand's never a big favourite or a big underdog against another hand, so you're there for the flop. You know, there's certain things in Hold'em that you call trouble hands. You know, King 10, you get re-raised and you call, and then you hit a 10, you don't know where you are. You hit a king, the guy might have ace king. In Omaha, it's much more unclear how aces are gonna, you know, have you dominated, or you know, it's really difficult to find a hand where there's not a good flop for you somehow. If you're going to make that opening raise, you want to call, especially if you raise from the button and then the big blind re-raises and you've got position.
And remember, aces are never that big a favorite in Omaha pre-flop. Back to the action. Watching this with PhilGalfond. And anything that either of these players are going to be changing up because it's not working?
No, I think both of them
Raise up to 3,000.
are playing very well, and I don't think
Raise
that
up to 9,000.
either of them, you know, they both are strong enough players and have played long enough that even a little bit of loss or even a big loss doesn't really shake their confidence in their game.
The 3-bet from Durrrr, again, call from Ziigmund. Is it fair to say that these players always call a 3-bet after they've raised?
Yeah, as deep as they are, I would say near 100% of the time they're going to be calling 3-bets just because of the power of position.
And you wouldn't do that in Hold'em as much, would you?
Certainly not. I would expect, you know, in a match like this, if it were Hold'em, you'd see them calling 3-bets closer to half the time, or a little less. And so we've seen Tom check after 3-betting a few times. This is the first time that he's flopped very strong and checked. And like I said before, he does do a good job of staying balanced.
And now he's checked it twice. But it's still a strong hand, right? Even on the turn?
It is still a strong hand. I think on the flop he was going to check raise. On the turn he was just going to check call. But he's played it very deceptively, and Ziigmund's been pretty lucky to improve, although has made 2 good check behinds.
16,000.
Crying call, or can you swallow your pride here?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Tom has a pure bluff catcher. His flop was very strong his hand was very strong on the flop, strong on the turn, and now is just can only beat a bluff.
You could look at this hand in a vacuum and say that Tom has butchered it. Has he?
He hasn't, and that's why I keep saying, you know, think about the times that he will be leading weak, or sorry, checking weak, when he'll be checking strong, and it's especially against somebody that you play this often. It's really not a match of just individual pots. It's your overall game, and you have to make sure that they can't know what you have in any one spot.
So he's not sitting there saying to himself, like, FML right now.
No. Okay. Tom's certainly confident in the way he played that hand, and he should be.
But Ziigmund, you can see by the stacks, has opened his lead up to a spot. I don't know if Tom might think about rebuying. He's only got about 150 there, I guess.
Yeah, Tom definitely likes to play deep, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him rebuy. And maybe Ziigmund will start to 3-bet a little bit more often, given that stacks are not as deep and that he's got some confidence and some stacks to work with.
Ziigmund's just called this raise.
Not much for either of them. And Tom continues to check behind more flops than Ziigmund and than most players.
3,000. Fold.
And a quick pass. Durrrr actually had the best hand there, and not really sure if Ziigmund was betting or bluffing.
Yeah, I think Ziigmund was just betting to bet, try to pick up the pot because Tom's checked behind so much. And yes, Tom had the best hand, but he had a very terrible hand, you know, in the overall scheme of things. So an easy fold there. And I wonder if he needs to be betting more flops. And if he's not, he's going to need to be bluff raising more turns, or at least calling more turns. Now, he's lost some money in some big pots that I think he's played very well. But I do think that if he keeps letting Ziigmund take these very small pots, in the long run, that's gonna make a big difference.
It's what's happening on the flop and turn right now, isn't it?
Right.
And Durrrr has...
5,000.
This is an interesting lead out, right? He doesn't have much.
Yeah, he has very little. He has the gut shot, backdoor spade draw, and bottom pair. And this is one of those spots that, you know, we've seen him lead out strong, and now we see him lead out weak again.
So it's a balance, or is it a naked bluff? Is it desperation? Is it...
I would say it's pretty much a naked bluff with some potential. You know, he does have a couple nut outs with some offsuit tens. Has some 2-pair outs, but it's pretty much a pure bluff.
Ziigmund's hit the 2-pair on the turn, but it actually was a flush card, and he bet it.
Yeah, interesting bet from Ziigmund. I think that bet is kind of just a take down the pot, protect my hand type bet. Not to give Tom the opportunity to bluff him on the river to improve to a better 2-pair, but certainly not a value bet.
394,000. That's Ziigmund's high in this match. It's nearly 150,000 ahead.
Yeah, he has a lot of momentum, but again, these guys have played so many hands and have seen swings that Tom is definitely not affected by this.
3,000. Call.
Standard. When you look at these percentages, 47, 53 before the flop, I mean, it's a flip, but are these hands, are they flip hands in a sense? I mean,
You could call almost any situation pre-flop in Omaha flip. Ziigmund has a better hand in terms of post-flop playability. Tom really had garbage. And, you know, with short stacks, it comes down to pre-flop equities, and it doesn't matter that much. But with stacks so deep, you have to think about what kind of hands your
Can I get
four
250
cards can
more?
make.
and Durrr's
Can I get
called
250
for a
more?
rebuy. It's not really a rebuy, it's a top-up. But he's going to be playing 500 deep now. You're not surprised about this?
No, not at all, and I'm happy to see it too. Should provide for better action. With stacks deeper, I think it gets a lot more interesting.
250,000 in purple chips coming from the tournament director or the floor manager here at the Les Ambassadors.
Yeah, and to be honest, I was wondering why Tom hadn't done it already, and I don't know. I was a little worried that he wasn't in the mood to play or something, so I'm glad to see him rebuy. Tom loves playing deep more than anyone I know.
Most people, and it is amazing because, especially in this game, heads up PLO. I mean, the river is just, it's like a maze, isn't it?
Yeah, every card, I mean, every card after the flop, both the turn and river, can change the nuts so much that you're very often in a guessing game, and you could find yourself in spots for super thin value bets, for really good bluffs.
Ziigmund's called pre-flop and now checked the three aces. He doesn't love his hand, does he? Or does he?
With Tom checking behind, he loves it now. He's certainly not going to check raise the flop because if he is behind, he has very few outs to improve. If he's behind to a hand like ace-8, he only has the 9. But here we see a spot where Tom's checked behind on the flop. That is a bit unusual, actually, in this case. Potentially saved him some money, although now.
Yeah, he raised, Durrrr raised this turn, 5 up to 18, and this is part of your balancing the range thing. This is a bluff.
Right, this is a bluff, and it's, in general, I've been talking about kind of in generalities of checking behind the flop and raising the turn. This is a weird spot to do it, because by checking behind, he's saying that he doesn't have an ace. And to raise the turn, he's saying that he has a full house or better, essentially. And it's pretty tough for him to have that unless he had, you know, pocket jacks. So a strange, aggressive play on the turn there. But, you know, if Ziigmund doesn't have an ace, he's going to pick up the pot most of the time.
Ziigmund ended up having 3 aces with a 9 kicker. Was he calling that river? Maybe.
Given their history, yeah, you never know. And that would be another spot where he only beats a bluff, even though his hand looks fairly strong. But Tom's certainly capable of making that bluff, and Ziigmund knows it.
Right now, Tom has made a couple of bluff raises. None of them have worked.
Now, he's been a little bit unlucky in running into hands from Ziigmund, and that's, you know, something that over the long run will even out, and you'll run into some weaker hands, and your bluffs will be more successful.
Also, I guess the advantage, and these are for these high-stakes players, they do that, bluffing raise, because when they do raise with a good hand, they're going to get called often.
Yeah, exactly. You know, a lot of people think that they can just wait for the nuts and then get a lot of money in. But against an observant opponent, that's not going to work because they're going to know you have the nuts and they're going to fold. So all the bluff raises that Tom makes and the bluffs that Ziigmund make allow them to get paid off when they do hit their big hands.
Is this trouble? 3 queens here, Ziigmund.
6,000.
Not a lot of trouble for Tom. He doesn't have a hand that he wants to build a big pot with. He has a hand he can find a call here with, but we shouldn't see him get in too much trouble here.
I know you paused. You almost thought he was check raising, didn't you?
Yeah,
Could he have? I mean,
you never know with either of them. I think both of these guys are two of the most unpredictable players in keeping their play balanced, and you never really know what they're gonna do. And now Tom has trips with top kicker. He only loses to pair of queens, pair of jacks, and ace queen or ace jack. So he's pretty happy about his hand. He loses to king 10 as well.
So is he check raising here? Is it as a thought, or is it you only check raise? You don't check raise because you can't get called unless you're beat.
Yeah, he can't get called unless he's beat. You could see him check raise actually, and it would actually be a semi bluff to take Ziigmund off of a hand like king 10 or pocket jacks or even pocket queens, and it's it would be an ambitious semi bluff that almost no one would make. But I wouldn't put it past Tom.
It's one of those weird things in Omaha. Gets sometimes when you have three of a kind, tough to read a hand. For Tom to make a full house, he needs to catch a king, an 8, or a deuce.
Correct, and he could improve to quads with an ace.
But a queen or jack will not. Well, a queen obviously makes Ziigmund quads, but a jack will not win this hand for him.
Right. And he did make this raise. This is a really strong play, and if he can make Ziigmund lay down this hand at some point, I'll be very, very impressed. So he's taken his trips top kicker and turned it into a bluff.
And obviously one of the exciting things is that had he not rebought, this hand plays a lot different because Ziigmund's never folding, but now
Exactly.
the possibility of what, 100K bet on the river.
Yeah, there's a lot more implied threat, and I'm curious to see how this river's going to play out. This is a really interesting hand.
And I mean, if he does make 100K bet on the river, I know Ziigmund will have a full house, but he can still only beat a bluff. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. It seems like he has a very strong hand, but he doesn't beat anything that Tom's playing this way for value.
Check.
Straight.
And when Tom improves to the straight, not a huge difference. He's still kind of giving up on his bluff and just hoping he somehow wins the hand.
Full house.
But the thing is, it's easy for Ziigmund to have played ace-queen that way to try to induce a bluff. So Tom decided to be safe to not fire again. And it seems like a really strange play for Tom to make that check raise, but because it's such a strange play, that kind of makes it that much stronger, because nobody expects him to do that.
However, 200K to the down, and the players will take a break and reflect on the game so far.
We have played many times in internet and live games too, and it's very fun. It's very fun to play against Tom.
There's definitely good action, and there's lots of big pots, which is awesome. It's not a boring game at all.
There is still plenty more action to come. Durrrr may be tired, but don't underestimate this high-stakes player.
I got a monster.
So thick.
This heads-up game continues after the break. Welcome back to the Durrrr $1 Million Challenge. There is Durrrr. Still the smile on his face, Phil, even though he's stuck a couple 100K.
Sure.
Yeah, no, he's happy to be playing poker and not too affected by a couple 100K.
And would you call him, is it typical of high-stakes players that he can handle the swings, or is he a real special case as far as that goes?
I think it's more typical than people would think, but Tom is better at it than anybody else I know, so he is a special case.
And that's all sort of about having an A game and a D game and an E game. Does Tom have a B game? Everybody.
I don't know if he thinks so. I think everybody does, yeah.
Check.
Looking at this pot, they've both kind of missed everything, I guess.
Yeah, not too much going on here. And I think if anybody took a stab
Check.
on the flop or turn, they would have taken it down.
2000.
And so this is a spot where Tom has checked behind and seemingly given up on the pot. But in order to do that and make it profitable, he has to take stabs like this. And this is a stab that most people wouldn't expect him to take. So even though he hasn't shown much aggression, this is still a strong call by Ziigmund with just second pair. A very strong call.
Right, even though he was getting like 4-1, you're trying to decide 4 cards that don't beat you there. I mean, are there? I don't even know if there were.
I would expect him to be behind a random hand there, and you could see Tom's a little bit surprised, or a lot bit surprised. But it shows how strong they are that both of them still care about the small pots.
And you have to, don't you?
You do. You can play, if you just play well in the big pots, you're going to end up losing against anybody half decent just because the majority of pots are small ones.
Omaha has become sort of the, I don't know, the fashionable game, high stakes and late. Is it because there's so much to learn for these players about it, or?
I think there are a few reasons. I think it's more fun, and that most high stakes players would agree. I also think that it's a little bit more complex in some ways, so it's not as figured out as Hold'em is. So there's a lot more room for different kind of playing styles and different theories to test themselves out.
Durrrr re-raised. He 3-bet to 9,000 here, and as far as that playability factor goes, 8-9 Jack Queen.
Yeah, a strong playable hand. Not as strong as some of the hands we've seen him re-raise with before, but still a very strong hand. And Ziigmund does make a call with just top pair, and it's kind of a loose call.
I mean, is it a float, or is there value in his hand?
He thinks that he's hoping to check this down. But the reason I say it's loose, and I think it's a little bit extra loose against Tom, is because Tom's checked so many flops after 3-betting. So Tom's kind of shown that he's willing to give up on some pots, and when somebody does that, the hands they're going to be betting with are usually stronger. So an ambitious call, I think, by Ziigmund that works out well.
And it looks like Durrr's rhythm is just slightly off, because we can see he would have almost certainly won with a bet on the turn.
Right. But the thing is, he doesn't expect Ziigmund to be calling that light, so he figured he was up against a flush or a stronger hand.
Levels on levels, looking at the stats, Ziigmund about 250K ahead, and he still has yet to 3-bet.
I guess it's working out for him.
A lot of interest in this game. We'll talk with some of the players who are on the rail.
TV poker historically has been a lot about 9-handed tournaments and Hold'em. I mean, today they're playing Pot Limit Omaha, for example. As a purist, cash games, deep stacked, you know, lots of flops, lots of turns, lots of rivers are way more complex and intricate and interesting than a normal tournament where it's late, someone has ace-king, someone has a pair of fours and they get it all in. So that's really fascinating, and also because it's heads up, over a period of time, some hours, a real dynamic can build up. And people who do strange things with strange hands, not so much because of the value of their hand, but obviously what they're all thinking, and there's a lot of psychology involved. So this is really, in my opinion, the purest form of poker.
Everyone's interested, you know, I keep seeing people here all day that are keen just to get a glimpse of what's going on, and Tom Durrrr, the biggest name in poker at the minute, is red hot.
I'd love to play against Tom, but for the stakes we need to be playing, I think heads up at the moment might be a little bit out of my league.
You've got to remember the two guys sitting out there are probably, you know, top 2 or 3 heads-up PLO players in the world. Just really the best of the best being, you know, playing at the moment.
It only takes one of them to go down by half their chip stack for the rest, for them to go absolutely, for them to lose the plot and then start raising and raising more. So it can happen any time, any minute, really.
Heads up, is there a rhythm thing where sometimes you just sort of, you make a lot of wrong guesses and you just can't get out of a rut?
For a lot of people, yes. I think that, you know, once you make a few decisions that end up being wrong, you start to doubt yourself and not have as much confidence. And I think that that's one of Tom's biggest strengths, is that he knows that he has a great game and he knows he's still playing it, and he's not going to panic or lose confidence in his decision-making ability.
Durrrr has re-raised again, and this time the big flop top set. Is it a big flop?
Yeah, this is, I mean, there are a lot of draws on this board, but given the type of hands that he'll usually be re-raising with, Ziigmund doesn't expect him to be huge here. And unfortunately, Ziigmund doesn't have anything, but also a light re-raise by Tom, and maybe he's looking to pick up the pace of the match. And, you know, if it were a lesser player, I would say he's just trying to up the stakes and get even quick, but maybe Tom has some other plan.
Do a lot of players talk about this idea, this sort of playability of the hands pre-flop, which is, because I hadn't heard it mentioned so, but obviously it's not about equity really. It's not about getting it in with equity.
Right. Yeah, I think that, you know, people do talk about it a little bit, but PLO is somewhat new, especially, you know, being played at high levels. So everybody's still kind of learning.
And so just sort of paying attention to the math is kind of a mistake?
Yeah, it is. You look at, you know, pre-flop equities, and the truth is in PLO, they're all going to run pretty close, and a lot of the hands look the same in terms of that. But you have to really look at spots where you could flop a very strong draw over a weaker draw or a strong hand over a weaker hand, because those are going to be the times that you can continue in the pot and win a big pot.
Because they were like flipping pre-flop, there was a flip on the flop, and now, even though Durrr's a strong favorite, I mean, how strong's his hand?
It's not very strong. I mean, if there's a lot of money going into the pot, he's not going to be happy with his hand.
Can he call a river bet here? We'll see.
Exactly.
Check.
Well, it went check. Yeah, I mean, perhaps nervous about an ace-8, or Tom didn't value bet, or?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if Tom was against a weak player, he could know his hand's best here, and he's not going to be put in a tough spot. But Ziigmund is very capable of check.
You remember when you had not plus in internet, online.
It must have lagged or something.
What?
It must have lagged or something.
Yeah. But
you only do that to me. I don't do it to you.
Yeah. I know it. I know it.
About slow
You
rolling.
didn't do it. It was a mistake, or you know. But yeah. I had
you used to do that to me a lot. I used to hate you.
I had queen high flush. You remember, you bet like 16,000. I moved all in 75,000.
No limit or PLO?
PLO. There was 3 hearts, and you had not flush, and it took like maybe 10 seconds. I was like, okay, 10. Okay. Then I brought slow rolling, and you brought. Yeah, no, I had never done. Never done it.
It's funny about among the high-stakes players. I mean,
Maybe
I think
you played many
that
tables.
is probably considered the most unethical thing you could do, and yet it's not really against the rules.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
used to slow me a lot.
No.
I guess, yeah, in the very high-stakes
Like 3
games,
years ago?
the standards for ethics are pretty high. It's not actually something that is cheating or anything near it, but definitely very frowned upon to, you know, take time to call with what's clearly the best hand. But I do know that Tom has never purposely slow-rolled anybody.
Even when he probably was entitled to.
Yeah.
This hand, now that turn card, if you're Ziigmund, is this, what is it? Is he counterfeited now?
Yeah, exactly. His 6 no longer plays, so he had aces and 6s. Now he has aces and 7s, which anybody with an ace has. Ziigmund has the 10 kicker, and Tom has an 8 kicker, and is going for a pretty thin value bet. But this is the same spot we saw before, where Tom bets 2,000 into 6,000. Last time he got looked up correctly by a weak hand.
Raise
Wow.
10,000 total.
This is a really strong check raise, or sorry, raise by Ziigmund. I honestly don't know if he's raising for value or as a bluff. I think for very thin value.
Or he's not trying to get ace-king and ace-queen to fold there, maybe?
He could be. But yeah, a very, very strange spot because, I don't know, you'd expect he'd usually just call with his ace-10.
Big pair.
But yeah, he could have been either, you know, thinking Tom was value betting more thinly than he did, or as thinly as he was and could get value, or he tried to get him off the better hand. But this is another thing that they've had so much history online with, you know, small river bets. We don't really know.
It was mystical, mystifying,
yeah.
And also very tough to read. I think sometimes the hands there. You have to remember that you have to use 2 cards in your hand. So even the jack kicker didn't play that last time.
Right. So Ziigmund's 10 kicker against Tom's 8, and yeah, that's usually I think when I can see their cards, I know what they're trying to do. That time I don't even know what he was trying to do.
It'd be funny to hear if either of them had an explanation for it.
Yeah. And so another weak lead by Tom. He's got the gutter, a backdoor flush draw, and Ziigmund raises with top 2 pair. Not expecting to get a lot of money from worse hands, but just trying to protect his hand and kind of punish Tom for leading so much.
And sort of in the relative terms of good, very, very good, can Ziigmund stick all his chips in right now with this hand?
He certainly doesn't want to. Could he? Maybe. But if Tom re-raises here, Ziigmund's hand is now a bluff catcher.
Re-raise.
And that's what's happened.
Wow.
I mean, what level are we on now? Level insanity or
Yeah.
what?
58,000 total.
Because, I mean, like, usually you'd think that Ziigmund's got a hand that has to be able to call, right?
You think that any hand he's raising for value,
It's a
or
dry
his,
board.
his strong, yeah, or his strong, he could have like a wrap like 5, 6, 7, 8 type hand. But I mean, if Tom runs into that, that's bad news for him. Tom does have 2 5s here and an 8, which makes something like that less likely. So I guess he thinks Ziigmund's raising either maybe a weak hand like Ace King without the 2 pair, and he thinks he can blow him off that hand, or maybe he thinks he can take Ziigmund off a hand even as strong as this.
Call.
And how much oh no is Tom in right now?
It kind of depends on how the hand plays out. He could find spots to give up, but he could very well get himself caught big.
Well, that's oh no for Durrrr. Ziigmund's got the nuts. And I mean, you could be barreling this if you're Tom here.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Ziigmund could easily have a draw, and this is a great card to bluff if Ziigmund has a draw, because his draws now could be no good against a full house. So Tom could bluff here. Looks like he gives up.
Check.
And Ziigmund checks behind.
Which feels scary because, I mean, it's not going to be the nuts likely on the river.
Yeah, and the 5 hits, which is, wow, absolutely, Tom's in a lot of trouble.
It's a disaster. So how does Tom figure this out? If he leads out here, what is he hoping to get called by?
Yeah, he's basically hoping to get called by a straight. So if Ziigmund did have, you know, one of the only 5 left in the deck with like 6, 7, 8, or some kind of lower like 2, 3, 5, 6 type hand.
Is lead out the right play though?
Who knows?
Yeah.
It's a very strange spot that he's found himself in.
And for Ziigmund, what a perfect card, because well, he just can't be beat.
Yeah, I mean, Tom improving definitely the best possible river in the deck for Ziigmund, and he'll be raising here with the nuts. And Tom will be in a tough spot. The thing that I think Tom is going to find a fold here, mainly because Ziigmund can't have air. The worst he can possibly have is a straight here, and Tom might not expect him to turn a straight into a bluff. So yeah, Tom does make the quick, seemingly difficult, but actually kind of easy lay down there.
Kind of easy? Well, he just folded a full house.
He did fold a full house, but you have to remember, given the action on the flop, Ziigmund can't have a weak hand. There's almost no possible way.
348,000 ahead for Ziigmund. He's making this look easy right now.
Yeah, he is. And PLO will do that to you. I mean, poker in general will when you run well. But these guys are both very, very strong, and it's a very close match. But in the short term, whoever's running well is going to be ahead. And that's not to say they're not both making great plays.
What? What did you say? I didn't hear what you said.
Yes, I had nice hand.
As Ziigmund storms into the lead in this heads-up clash, will Durrrr go on tilt? The action continues here at the Full Tilt Poker Durrrr $1 Million Challenge after the break. Welcome back to the Durrrr $1 Million Challenge, Phil. And just for the hands we've seen, Durrrr has taken an unorthodox line, what, like every time?
Yeah, so often, and that's, you know, one of the keys to playing against a great player like Ziigmund is that you have to remain unpredictable, and Tom's great at doing it.
But yet, isn't there this fine line between unpredictable and, I don't want to say bad, but something that's going to lose you money at some point?
Yeah, at some point there is, and that's a common term in the poker world is FPS for fancy play syndrome. And it's when, you know, you get a little too
140,
carried
I think.
away being tricky and start making plays that kind of cross the line into just bad.
Speaking of, Durrrr has made a 3-bet here, and now Ziigmund
135.
has asked for a count. He's on the button with aces.
Yeah, he wants to know how much of his stack he can get in here, and if Tom has a strong hand, which he should to re-raise, Ziigmund could be worried about finding himself in a lot of tricky spots on the flop.
So he's put 27 here, and because Durrr's got like just about 100 and a bit left, Ziigmund's kind of saying to himself, I'm almost always putting the rest of them in.
Right.
That's his decision.
He's saying I'm getting everything in now. On almost every flop I'm going with the hand, and that's going to work out to be profitable. And Tom here actually has a worse hand than Ziigmund expects to be 3-betting. So Ziigmund showing up with his, you know, decent equity edge pre-flop. He's even going to be closer to 50-50 pre-flop more often than not.
On flush draw, I hope. Ace high.
Well, it went bang, bang, bang. Ziigmund obviously always expecting to get these chips in, I guess. And
yeah. And this is the spot you find yourself in
25.
when you get all the 3-betting and 4-betting that we haven't seen earlier in the match.
25. Yeah, there you go. That's a good 5.
very
Okay,
good
now in
card
10.
for Durrrr.
Yeah, Ziigmund's drawn to 2 aces now.
And this is the classic spot with aces in Omaha, right? Aces and hating them.
Yeah, you get as much as you can in pre-flop and kind of hope for the best on the flop. And after then.
Sorry, I normally hate when people do stuff like that. I was just convinced I was going to lose.
Yeah, Tom does like to... I've sat behind him watching him play, and you'll see him get it in like 80%, and his opponent needs a 6, and he just roots for a 6.
No, 115.
And not that I really believe in that kind of thing working, rooting for cards, but it bothers me.
The reverse karma sweat or something like that. But the double up now, and Tom up to about 270-odd thousand. He'll still be stuck a couple 100K, though. He's in for 500.
Yeah, so it helps a little bit, but there have been so many big pots in Ziigmund's favor so far.
I told your dad about the Sammy and Roland playing soccer thing. I just figured he knew about it already.
There are a lot of people coming in
I
from
tried.
the rail, and Durrrr here.
I think I would put in some good words.
He's been in London sort of off and on for the last month and a half. You know, the World Series of Poker Europe. He's made quite a few friends while he's been over.
Yeah, I mean, the poker community, especially high-stakes poker communities, kind of a tight-knit, small community. And, I mean, for us online guys, we're starting to meet everybody. But everybody's pretty friendly in the small community.
Sometimes you're very surprised when you put a face to a name.
Yeah, yeah.
Did Durrrr just call here on the flop?
Yes.
Check and call?
He did just check and call, and, you know, part of that is not wanting to build a big pot out of position where the turn, you know, any turn over a 9 or higher can change the deck so much, or change the board so much. But it's also deception.
Perfect river from Dwan's perspective. Ziigmund was drawing dead, but he hit his best card.
Yeah, so I'm curious if Tom is going to value bet here, or maybe even go for somewhat of a thin check raise, although not super thin. He just decides to make the more standard play and bet. And when you make so many non-standard plays, sometimes the standard play is tricky.
What's going on in Ziigmund's mind? Is he ever raising here? Straight?
He's not raising for value, no. I mean, it's possible for Tom to have a worse straight, very possible, but it'd be very tough for him to pay him off, to pay Ziigmund off, that is. And I would expect Ziigmund to find a call. Wow, he's considering folding, and that's impressive to me. I mean, it is a spot where nothing missed, so if Tom was drawing and wanted to turn his hand into a bluff, there's really no options for that. But yeah, Ziigmund ends up making the call. But impressive that he wasn't happy about it.
I'll say. I don't know. Couldn't see Tom showing up with that hand there, or Queen Jack, or you
Yeah.
feel like he would have check raised so often.
I mean, it's possible, but normally, Tom can be value betting even, Ace King or King 9 or worse straights. That it's just an automatic call from Ziigmund's point of view. So I'm not sure what he's reading into, but he's done a pretty good job of making some good laydowns or good near laydowns against Tom today.
Starting to get the feeling that these guys would just switch places and play each other's cards in the style of themselves, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I've always, of course, been impressed with both of them in their play, but
Not a lot.
this is a really
We'll do
good
more
match
later.
and some interesting hands
Okay,
and very strong plays.
I think they've upped the stakes here. This is what you call the 3-9 game.
Oh, really?
He doesn't have an option.
And
Like
it's
how we play
odd because
online,
it's
right?
not 2 live straddles. It's
you
2
can raise it
blind
if you want.
raises.
Right, but I'm saying you don't have the option to
Right,
raise.
so
It's a call.
I think technically
Yeah,
they,
no, of course.
I don't know if they'll let you do this in a casino, but if the 2 players agree to it, they can do whatever they want. And so what's happened is Tom's raised to 3,000 without looking at his cards. Ziigmund's raised to 9,000 without looking at his cards. And then they play the hand from there.
All right, and Durrrr has the option of just calling and then taking the flop.
Right.
It's a massive disadvantage to the big blind this game. Is that that's what it feels like?
Yeah, it is a very big disadvantage to the big blind, and I'll assume they won't just do it for one hand, so Ziigmund will get his fair shot. But it's also just a massive upping of the stakes.
Because
9.5 flush. I think.
oh,
Yeah.
weird! I didn't, I didn't see that. I thought Ziigmund had made the 5 high straight, and Durrrr
right.
had the 7 high straight.
Yeah, Ziigmund had the flush and checked it down to the river. And yeah, you can see this format getting huge because now Ziigmund has made it 9,000 with 100% of hands. So if Tom shows up with a decent hand, he's going to be making it, what, 27,000. And then you already have a $54,000 pot just with a single raise.
Yeah, it feels like gambling. I think they're just doing it, they decided there's a break coming up where they're trying to just pep up the game a little bit. I mean, it's big.
Yeah, it's very big, and the thing is they do this, I wouldn't say all the time, but they do it fairly often, and I think it's just because they both like gambling.
And yet, sort of this advantage about being on the button, it's not as big an advantage position because there's no way the stacks can be deep enough to, if you know what I mean.
Right, yeah, the stacks are, in practice, the stacks are just as deep as they were, but it's different because there's so much in the pot, so the relative stacks, there's not as much left behind to play because the pot's already so big.
Because like if they were playing like 800 big blinds deep, you just make it 27 every time from the button?
Exactly.
Okay. And check Ziigmund's bet here. The first time we've seen this, sort of the dry ace on a flushing board.
Yeah.
He can never have a flush here.
Right. So he can't improve to a flush. He doesn't have a flush draw. He just has the ace of hearts blocker, we call it, and bluffing with the ace of hearts blocker is sometimes, especially in tough matches, like a near mandatory play because, like I've been talking about so often, balance. You know that your opponent can't have the nuts, and you're going to have the nuts sometimes, and you're going to need to play it very strong. And in order to do that, this is a perfect opportunity to do it without a strong hand.
Near mandatory to stick in 3 barrels of a pot-sized bet, huh?
It's funny to say that, but in a match like this, yes, it's near mandatory. And Tom doesn't have a huge hand, but he has a lot of outs to improve. So even if he expects to not be good now, if he gives Ziigmund credit for the nut flush, he still has
kings, queens, and deuces.
Kings, queens, and deuces to improve, and the potential to get a value bet on the river.
And, I mean, just to sort of balance this out, how often is Ziigmund betting here with the jack high flush and the 10 high flush and the 9 high flush?
That's where, being an aggressive, fearless player comes in. Ziigmund is doing it a lot more often than most people. Most people are kind of playing conservatively with weaker flushes. The question is he going to lead out to try to get value from a flush? Or is he going to try to let Ziigmund bluff again, or try to let him value bet too thinly? this is Tom's big decision, but I know Tom, and I know that he had a plan for this decision before we even saw the river.
Can't get any money by betting. I mean, not. He'll be happy enough to see the queen, but
yeah, against Ziigmund's actual hand, Ziigmund's not going to have a decision here. But it would be a very interesting spot if Ziigmund had a strong flush.
At least bet about the pot, and
138,000 total.
So, I mean, Ziigmund has queens and tens. He can't call. He could find a bluff raise, but he's almost definitely just has to throw away this hand.
And Dwan, he was winning, so it's hard to say he got there. You don't.
Right.
Did he get there? I mean,
he didn't, but he could have. The thing is, and you saw Ziigmund pretty upset when he threw away his cards. If the river doesn't pair, he's probably taking a stab and potentially winning.
it is said that Tom Dwan is one of those rare players with a natural talent for this game. He won his first $1 million when he was still at college.
So the first time I ever won $1 million in a day was 3.5 years ago. I was 19, and I was playing one person heads up no limit hold'em on Prima, and another person heads up Pot Limit Omaha on full tilt. And I was jumping back and forth, and sometimes I was playing the other game with both of them also. And I was playing for maybe 16 hours out of the day. I was playing intermittently. I'd play for 2 hours and then be off for an hour. And both of them kept coming back and kept getting unlucky and losing. And obviously, I'd like to think I had an edge in both the matches, but my edge wasn't $1 million, because back then the highest stakes were 200, 400. And it's a pretty absurd amount of money to win in a day at 200, 400. And I'd assume it was probably the biggest win ever online at the time. That's definitely been surpassed now with the 500,000 tables that were added recently. But I think that lasted for a while, and it was just a really, really lucky day that I had, and I was pretty happy after. And I remember actually, I was supposed to go on spring break the next day, but since I had been up for so long that day, I ended up skipping it, where I normally would be sad to skip spring break, but the memory of winning 1.3 million lasted for a little bit more than the memory of spring break would have, I think.
The stakes aren't going down, and Ziigmund may just choose to kick them up again. Tom Dwan set out this challenge. He can fold his cards, but he won't say no. Join us the next time the Full Tilt Poker Durrrr $1 Million Challenge continues. There are some big pots to come when the cards go back in the air. Durrrr hasn't slept for days, but he has started to pick up the pace. Can he beat rival Ziigmund to claim victory in this $1 Million Challenge? Find out when this Heads Up Flash resumes.
I'm so delirious right now.
If you want to quit, we can quit.
Thank God.